let's just get started and jump into it. So on the agenda today, Bucket Blade submitted a couple questions, but since he might not be able to join today, we'll delay those for a future call. If he does join mid-call, we'll cover those. The only other thing on the agenda was Pierre wanted to follow up on the Trustless Fisherman ADR that was proposed to the.
Sorry, my mic glitched.
Cool. So let me just share my screen. But yeah, so kind of on the agenda is pretty short. It's Pierre wanted to discuss something he proposed a couple of weeks ago. And in addition to that, I also want to go over some of the things that passed over the a couple things that were merged a couple of days, specifically regarding scholarships, contributions, and how we can really get like everyone in the community involved from a technical standpoint, contributing to V1. But before I do that, Pierre, do you want to introduce what you want to discuss regarding the ADR?
Yeah, another thing that I forgot to add to the agenda was challenge transactions. I thought about it more, and I'm not sure whether it's a good idea to include them or not. So I wanted to talk about that. So we can talk about that after the Trustless Fisherman.
Can we mute MSI? Thank you.
It's fine. We got the music that we requested earlier.
Be careful what you ask.
So
let's Pierre. So introduce the ADR, then we can go over contribution, and then we'll discuss challenge transaction at the end.
Okay, so let me pull it up. Okay, so a brief summary of the ADR. Right now, the planned V1 Fisherman model, there's not really any support for Trustless Fisherman. This is an issue for a couple of reasons: centralization, points of failure. We don't want basically this will basically make V1 even more beast than it already is. So this is something that I think that is very important to get included, and that's why I've been putting in some effort to come up with some solutions. So the first part is if you're going to have multiple fishermen, you need a good way to group some fishermen in with some service nodes or some service node sessions. And there's a couple ways you can do this. I think the two big ones are continuous random sessions initiated by the fisherman, and then also the basically, whenever a service node session is created by the protocol, it'll also create a fisherman session parallel in it. So they each have their pros and cons. The continuous random sessions, basically, this will work by every certain period of time, or after the minimum session delay, a fisherman will create a new session with a VRF, and it'll propagate this to all the other fishermen. The fishermen can choose to participate. They're economically incentivized to participate because the more samples that they push to the network, the more that they're rewarded. So they're all very incentivized to do this. So a fisherman will create this fisherman session, propagate it to all the other fishermen, and then at a set period of time, they'll come to consensus and start the testing period. Testing period is just a measure of time where the fishermen will send requests to the service nodes and benchmark them to push later on a test score. Now, as Ben Vaughn, I'm not sure if he's here, but Ben Vaughn in the last call brought up the issue of if you have these continuous random sessions initiated by fishermen, then applications can't easily send their ephemeral keys to the fishermen to monitor their sessions. Now, this doesn't have a perfect solution, but on a fisherman, you could just open up an RPC that tells you what fishermen are monitoring which service nodes. So the pros of this one is there's a lot of moving parts, which makes doxing fishermen easier. If you aren't familiar with the threat of doxing fishermen, basically, if you're a service node and you're receiving requests for applications, there's going to be a fisherman who tries to hide within the request and benchmark you. But using a couple different methods, it's possible, at least right now with the current spec, it's possible and almost trivial to identify the fisherman's IP. And then you can just block requests from applications other than the fisherman. So this basically cuts your cost of running blockchains to almost zero, and you'll have better quality of service and make more money. We definitely don't want this because that means there's no service. So that we need to make sure that it's as difficult as possible to find out who these fishermen are. This is one way, because if there's going to be 10 new fishermen every minute, then for a service node, it's going to be extremely difficult to figure out exactly which fishermen are monitoring it or not. And if they try and block if they try and block some of the fishermen, then they're going to get wrecked, because if they try and block or don't block some of the fishermen, if there's a consensus split, they're going to get wrecked, because that comes off really bad on their test scores. So that's one benefit. Some of the cons, there will be more chain bloat, and it's harder for applications to identify which fishermen are monitoring their sessions. Now, there's the protocol generation of fisherman sessions. This one is probably going to be more likely implemented because it's easier to do, and it's more, I don't know, like it's initiated by the protocol, so it's easier to track, etc. This is as basically it generates another session of fishermen in parallel to a service node session and links them together. So during the period of the service node session, the same fisherman will be monitoring the service nodes the entire time. So pros, it's much easier for the applications to identify the fishermen and the session generation on the protocol level, but it's easier to identify and dox fishermen. So that's so after they've participated in a fisherman session and have sampled all the service nodes, then they're going to report their test scores to the network. There really doesn't need to be too much changed here, other than they might need to include some session ID or link to the fisherman session they participated in just for tracking purposes. And so after this, there's the grading period. So after all the test scores have been submitted, and it's the next block, all the fishermen are going to be graded based on their test scores and how similar they are to consensus. I forget the term. I think it's let me find it. Daniel mentioned it. It's called wisdom of the crowds. So we're gonna go with a similar approach to that. Is how Chainlink incentivizes theirs. So they post all the test scores, and the network, basically the thing that it's grading is going to their reputation. Their reputation is a value representing how reputable their fisherman is and how accurate their test scores are. So basically, the better the fisherman, the higher the reputation. So the way that this process is going to work is the network is going to iterate through all of the test scores that the fisherman sent. Now we'll just talk about one test score and how to grade that. So in a session, let's just, for example, there's 10 different nodes. So for every node, there's going to be an individual number representing, or like numbers and then non-null samples sent by the fisherman, basically saying, okay, this is the latency I got, this is the error rate I got, etc. That's kind of an oversimplification, but that's roughly what it's going to be. So if there's 10 service nodes in a session and there's 10 fishermen, then each service node will have 10 of these like values and reports by each fisherman. So the network will aggregate the results of all the fishermen on one service node, and then run an algorithm like a z-score or something that accounts for standard deviation. It's basically like a more complicated median that excludes outliers. And so it's going to take this algorithm. It hasn't been defined yet because that's pretty complicated. We need to do more research on that. And then this will go on the service nodes report card. Just as a brief explanation, the service nodes report card is basically how well that, like all the benchmarks of that service node, and then that corresponds to how well the service node is rewarded. So it's going to take these aggregate values. It'll grade the service node. There's also going to be some accounting for each fisherman's reputation, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So now, what does this mean for the fisherman? So let's say 9 fishermen gave a service node the benchmark of 2, and this one fisherman gave the service node a benchmark of 1. Because this is so different from all the other fishermen, its reputation is going to be tarnished as a result. So it's going to go through all the test scores. It's going to grade the service nodes, and it's also going to grade the fishermen based on how similar it is to the consensus. So after the reputation has been graded, then it moves on to the rewarding process. This is pretty simple. It's simple to fishermen. There's the total volume usage, which is just how many relays went through, and that's evenly divided into buckets. Fishermen that are above the reputation cliff. The reputation cliff is just a value to prevent really shitty fishermen from getting any rewards. So then that's going to cause the max fisherman salary, and then basically that max fisherman salary will be put into a function as well as the fisherman's reputation. So this is going to be a function modifiable by the network to meet network parameters. So if, like, for example, Daniel, can you scroll up a little bit to the graph? Yeah, so this is like an example that I threw out. It's just like a simple modified quadratic equation. And this line here, so this is going to be modifiable by the network. And the reason this needs to be modifiable is, for example, let's say there's like a huge concentration of service nodes on one domain. To prevent a fisherman from rewarding, basically from deviating from the consensus and rewarding their own service nodes with more rewards to offset the lack of rewards from the fishermen, this line is going to be toggleable. So the steeper the line, the more economically unviable it becomes for fishermen to lie about the reports. And if their reputation goes below a certain mark, not only can they not unstake, but they're going to get burned. So this is basically the core function of how we're going to prevent people from just saying, oh, wow, look how good my service nodes are, and then reaping the rewards of that. So this is going to be the real test to see how centralized Pocket is and whether Trustless Fisherman is viable, because it's hard to model out network parameters that are still a year and a half in the future. And so this whole Trustless Fisherman thing is probably going to be a toggleable switch, and then we'll identify after Pocket's been released whether it's okay to turn this on. So this is still in progress. I'm curious to hear any comments that you guys have about it. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Thanks, Pierre. So let me just jump in. For those that joined late or those that don't have as much context into the utility spec, I just wanted to take a step back before we dive deeper. But this conversation does require some context regarding how utility V1 is proposed. But in the current spec, we do have a staged kind of deployment and evolution mechanism where the fishermen are permissioned by the DAO. And so this proposal, this ADR, which we may use a different term in the future, aims to alleviate it. Overall, Pierre, I left a few comments, just maybe a few minor nits here and there. And I think everyone on the call, it's worth understanding that there are technical details that we're glossing over that will need to be resolved and designed. But for the purpose of discussion, for the purpose of acceptance into the spec, I think those can be, those don't need to be as well defined until we get into the implementation stage. So overall, the proposal makes sense to me. Permissionless fisherman is definitely going to make the network stronger and more decentralized. Whatever function we end up using, I have some personal biases or preferences where I think a Z-score would do a really good job, and that also wasn't the crowd approach would work well. So before we jump into some of the specific questions that I wanted to shoot back at you, Pierre, I wanted to take a moment to everyone in the meeting to ask a anyone has any questions, comments about the proposal from a very high level perspective first, or if anyone needs additional clarification. So, Pierre, one thing I wanted
to V1 experts in the call.
But at least as a whole, if someone has kind of sees any potential big gaping holes that we're overlooking. One question I want to ask was for the second proposal, where we talk about a fisherman session. I think that's a more likely approach. Now, whether we couple it with a note service session or decouple it, I think at least as a first round, coupling them will be easier, both from an implementation perspective, from a change load perspective, while not losing any of the downsides. But you mentioned here one of the cons, it being easier to identify and dox fishermen. I kind of want to understand, like, why is the protocol fisherman session, why does it make it easier to dox fishermen than the first proposal you have? Between the two?
The primary reason for that is because let's say a service node session lasts, right now it lasts around an hour, right? So you get these 10 fishermen that are monitoring your session during this hour. So that means you have an entire hour to see, okay, when are these fishermen sending simultaneous requests? Is there consistent sampling delay? And I'm sure that if someone really puts in the effort, they could create a machine learning model to just filter through all the requests and try and identify and dox the fishermen. So this gives the service nodes an hour to do this versus you have the continuous random sessions. At least from my ideation, I think you could probably do like generate one of these each minute or 1 or 2 minutes. And not to mention you have multiple of these continuous fisherman sessions monitoring the same session at a time. And this makes, because instead of having an hour to figure out exactly which fisherman and what to do, now you have like minutes and it's just way more complicated. There's more moving parts. So from my perspective, if I was trying to attack the fisherman, I would prefer protocol fisherman sessions because that's like, boom, I know what fisherman, I have an hour to figure out exactly what to do, and I'm going to do it. Versus you have this continuous random, and boom, I don't know who are my fishermen going to be the next minute? Who are my fishermen going to be the next minute? So that was my thinking why I wrote that.
Got it. So if we were to, so it basically comes from an analytical kind of evaluation of fishermen within a session that you can start doxing them. But in one of the other proposals you actually submitted, you suggested randomizing the sampling, the sampling delay in between within a single fisherman session. Do you think that would kind of alleviate that point without the need for random fisherman session generation?
Yeah, for the most part. Although the whole sampling protocol, that maybe we should add that to the agenda as well, because I've been struggling to think of like a real sampling protocol that's impossible to game, because at least the current one, not as like a insult to any of the people who wrote the V1 spec, but it's very trivial to game basically. So that's another thing. Another concern that I have is that if you give the fisherman your ephemeral key, from the application standpoint, let's say you have a node in the session. For those who haven't read the V1 spec, you can give the fisherman your application key, which will then send relays to the session to monitor it. What you can do is, let's say you have a service node of the session, the same actor can send an ephemeral key of their application to the fisherman. And then the second they receive a request from that application that they know wasn't from them, then they immediately know who was sent from and which IP is the fisherman. So that's another concern I have. The sampling protocol is probably one of the most important parts of it. So I think that should be talked about more. But I mean, yeah, a random would definitely make it harder, but it's still not impossible, which is why doing continuous sessions would make it extremely more difficult, because instead of having an hour to send the fisherman your application key and then receive requests from it, you have like 30 seconds to a minute, as well as like 100 fishermen just constantly rotating, which makes it a lot more difficult.
Okay, I understand. So that explanation is actually helps from my point of view, the idea of having a different fisherman session is now growing on me a little bit, just because it provides optionality, kind of like a chaos monkey type of testing approach when it comes to sampling the service nodes. It's definitely more complex at the protocol level. It would almost similar to how the current spec has stages for deploying permission fishermen. I would almost vote for having pages for the fisherman sessions if we do decide to go with this proposal, where maybe initially they're coupled more tightly. Later, we decouple them all together as the network continues to grow. But that would also require the schema and the kind of how the state, it would require us to design the state in the schema in such a way that transition won't be too complex. But that way it'll also drive well with the development of the initial launch.
Yeah. Another thing that I thought about is just allowing fishermen to query whatever service node they want. And then on service nodes that haven't been queried much, basically reward them more for querying those service nodes. But that might be a whole nother can of worms. I'm actually might add a little section about that way as well, because that could be interesting.
I have a question for you, Pierre. On the you mentioned earlier that the fisherman, like a scenario where a fisherman provides a lower score than the average, that would reduce their quality confidence score. Is the scoring protocol going to make it? Will that happen as a function of the protocol, or will that always be something that would say this is a fisherman issue?
You mean like the like changing the reputation based on the fisherman's results? Yeah, that's a protocol level thing.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's a change there, if a fisherman reports something that's out of the ordinary, that would be a manipulation.
Yeah, if the fisherman reports anything out of the ordinary or sort of contradicting the wisdom of the crowds, then that fisherman, the protocol is going to wreck that fisherman, and it's either going to get significantly less rewards, or if it has one outlier, then it's not going to be an issue. Oh, I forgot to mention the actual the salary of the fisherman is going to be, this is kind of a keynote that I missed. So the way that a fisherman's accuracy for a certain fisherman session is recorded, that's going to go on a similar like report card style thing as a service node. So it's going to be basically a rolling list of fisherman session accuracies, and then those session accuracies, the mean or median or whatever, that is what's the actual reputation. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, if a fisherman goes against it, it's going to get a lower session accuracy. And if it continues to have lots of low session accuracies on its report card, then that reputation is going to get really low, and it's either going to get burnt. And it can't be unstaked, or it's going to be very low rewards.
But a lower accuracy would always be something that the fisherman, it would always be a manipulation, right? That isn't something that could result naturally because of network network issues or protocol differences between the fishermen responses and requests. So
yeah, it could happen. It could happen via network, but the incentive of the fisherman is to give the most accurate test scores possible. So if there is an issue with the network that's impacting, whether it's manipulation or not, that's still impacting the accuracy of that fisherman and is impacting how servicers are rewarded. and that's not good. So no matter what, even if it's not manipulation, you're still trying to incentivize the fisherman to be as accurate as possible.
Just to jump in, Steve, if we're assuming that there's lots of different fishermen sampling lots of different service nodes from different points of view, there's definitely a lot of different factors and variables in play. But I think an assumption that's fair to make is that all of those sampling delays are going to be normally distributed. And that's why using something like a mean or a z-score to determine how accurate you are relative to that normal distribution, combining that with a rolling average kind of helps prevent outliers where, if a fisherman encounter an outage, we don't want that to harm their overall score too much because of a single point of failure.
Yeah, I guess that's the question I was trying to understand. So really, it's going to be statistical outliers that would cause your score to go down. If you're in an outlying group, that and certainly if that is happening over time, that would indicate something malicious. But it seems like because networks are imperfect, that could happen as a result of just kind of natural network stuff. But it would have to happen, I suppose, on a frequent basis before it really adversely affects your score.
Yeah, it's why I like that test score analogy and terminology here. Kind of like school, grades are normally distributed, and one bad test couldn't kind of bring your whole grade down. So the test score analogy works well in that sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that analogy as well.
Yeah. Luis, can you unmute, or do you want me to read out your question?
I had a question, or more of a comment as well with the scoring system of the fisherman.
Shane, is it all right if we, since Luis raised his hand a few minutes ago, if we just cover his question first?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on mobile. I did not notice that. Yes, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna read it out. From Luis, we're designing V1 with WebSockets in mind. However, the difficulty on sampling WebSockets is because WebSockets is not a one request to one response. One WebSocket connection can have n responses to one request, for example. If the fishermen are greater now similar, they respond to other fishermen, wouldn't it create an incentive instead of telling the truth? They would want their test scores. They would want their test scores to be as similar as possible to other fishermen, meaning if a fisherman submits their score first, other fishermen are incentivized to submit a score as similar as possible to that first score sent. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's kind of being able to look into the future to see what other fishermen, what kind of values other fishermen have ahead of time. But if the fishermen are only sent on chain at the end of that session, be it a session that's coupled with service nodes or a session that's completely random, there's no way to really predict it. I think I'm missing the importance of WebSockets here.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my comment about WebSockets was answering Angry Boo's question, who is no longer in the call, I think. The actual question was, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, your connection is pretty good.
Okay, cool. Awesome. That's perfect. So my question is, the end of the session comes, and now you should have a range of time in which you're gonna submit your test score transaction. What makes it so that we as how can I say this? The first fisherman to submit that transaction will have their test score on chain. So now other fishermen can read from that and basically just send something that is going to be as similar to that by manipulating the end result. Because here's an economic trade-off that they have to do. They can remove samples from the submission and basically manipulate the score, because even if they are incentivized to submit as many samples as possible, they are also counter incentivized to not have their reputation be degraded. So in that particular case, I worry that it's going to create an incentive of, let me optimize to not have my reputation degraded. So I'm going to wait for some other first fisherman to submit their score, or some other threshold of fishermen to submit their score. And instead of telling the truth, being the most accurate that I can be, I'm going to try and be as similar as possible to these other fishermen.
Yeah, I forgot to mention this in the ADR, but there would probably be a similar system where the fishermen send their scores that are like encrypted or hashed somehow in one block, and then on the next block they reveal the key or whatever that they encrypted it with. I forgot that. Yeah, collusion attacks is something I thought about. I think that solves it. The only other thing is that if someone has a lot of fishermen, then they can just communicate messages to each other. Like if there's a bunch of fishermen run by the same actor or a party of actors that are in collusion, then they can message each other their fisherman score and get them as close as possible. The reason why this shouldn't be too much of an issue, as one, I believe that consensus will always be positive, and two, if they all concentrate in like very close or something, they won't really be rewarded too much, because as you saw, that quadratic that function is toggleable and changeable. So for example, if it's within like 80 or 90% accuracy, like there's not really any benefit to colluding within that range, because the reputation won't be changed very much. I'll add that note to the ADR. I'll edit it. That's a good point.
Yeah, and Luis, I'll leave a comment with what you suggested. So, assuming we have fishermen 1 through n and service nodes n1 through nn, some fishermen fi waits for subset from fi to fn to submit their scores, and basically we just need kind of similar to like how we do proof of relays. We need a proof that your service that your scores were computed, and there's some reference to them in our kind of Merkle tree on chain before we start computing it. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking something along those lines, but I was also thinking that you can only affect the score to be better by taking out all the negative samples, like null samples and things like that. So you might make it so that if every other fisherman give it a high score, you can manipulate your evidence set to only have the samples, and you can recompute your tree and basically have only the samples that are going to align to a certain test score. The thing that I like about incentivizing the fishermen just to meet as much evidence as possible and not have to worry about anything else was exactly that this problem doesn't exist. So it's a trade-off that is acceptable if we have a good solution, but just wanted to surface it since it wasn't in the ADR. I think this is a quick amendment that we can do.
Yeah, I think that the submitting all your scores and stuff in an encrypted way, and then on the next block after everything's already been submitted on chain, submitting the key, I think that solves that issue there. What do you think, Luis?
So you're saying that after I do, imagine something similar to the claim and proof, where you say, hey, here's the score I give you, and I prove that score by taking whatever sample that you ask of me in the future. You're saying that...
What you're saying...
I wanted to amend that to say, so you're saying that in that last step, we basically submit like a key to unencrypt the result, and that lets the validator of that transaction. It's like a third step, like claim, proof, and reveal kind of life cycle, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah. So yeah, because what you would do is you'd monitor the mempool, you'd see what the other fishermen are saying, and then copy that. But if all those transactions and the data in them is encrypted, then there's nothing that you can do.
And it's encrypted by the fisherman itself. So So a proof of collusion could be that the fisherman. The problem is sending a key in a transaction can make it. Well, I mean the proof transaction is gonna be larger, so it could be just 32 bytes. So when I send the key, basically it reveals what test score I gave. So if people are too close to me, that means that there is a potential collusion, and we could catch them there. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, basically the fisherman would just generate a random string, and then all the data, it would just encrypt the bytes by that key or whatever, and then it would publish the encrypted bytes in one transaction, and then after they all on the next block, then it would publish that the string or the key that it encrypted it with.
And they get paid, or their reputation gets affected after they reveal the key, basically.
Yeah.
Oof. I worry that with your suggestion of having more fisherman sessions, and then each one of these fishermen has to reveal, it could create some chain bloat that we'll have to take a look at. But I understand the life cycle, and I think it's a good approach. I think that even you don't even have to encrypt so many bytes. All you have to do is encrypt the result of your test score, and then we shouldn't be too much. It's like it will be like in today's model, in B0 model, like it will be like encrypting the number of relays that you actually say you did, and then you reveal it after you prove it, something along those lines. So you don't have to encrypt a large data set. You encrypt the A that you gave the node, and then you prove, and then you reveal. And in the reveal, the other fishermen can see what you created the node, but they cannot see it beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. I've thought about it more on this call. I think that the continuous random sessions is not the way, and I think that there will have to be some like Tor network with IPs switching all the time to actually keep the fisherman anonymous. Like what you said earlier, like a VPN, sort of like a Tor network. Yeah, that because no matter what, I feel like you could still figure out how to dox a fisherman. I think that that's a pretty good solution, though.
What I was going to in more in a macro sense to open up this design space is that when we thought about apps and their clients, we thought when we designed the first AIT system, we thought that no matter like the separation here will be that these clients are acting on behalf of this app. So if we could create some sort of ephemeral actor, the client is considered an ephemeral actor. So if we could consider them if we could do the same with fishermen, where you have fishermen and their whatever children structure will be named, and these ephemeral actors can also have ephemeral locations or circumstance from which they send the requests, then maybe nothing that will be available about the fishermen on chain or register anywhere will link them to those ephemeral actors. That's where I was going to with this.
Yeah, I think that could work.
I actually like that this was just mentioned, because that was actually going to be my comment, was a Tor like. I was almost thinking like having gateways, actually kind of giving gateways as a almost like a type of node, similar to how it is now, where we have our current gateway. It'd almost be like we have fishermen, that go through the gateway as well. That's what we're already operating. And down the road, I almost feel like we're going to become a network of gateways as well, because gateways are going to be able to offer specialty QoS and features and things like that. That I almost wonder if considering gateway as the privacy layer would make sense here.
Yeah, the only issue with that is that if it's a public gateway, the whole privacy component kind of goes away. Each Tor network would probably have to be run by each fisherman, or like a fisherman, like a bunch of fishermen will have to use like the same kind of network. I think that, because if there's a bunch of IPs that are constantly changing, that is impossible to dox it. and then the fishermen are economically incentivized to keep up their own private Tor network because otherwise they might get doxxed, and then if they get doxxed, I think it'll ruin their reputation. If they get doxxed and other fishermen don't get doxxed, because if they submit like a pause transaction or something, and the other fishermen don't, then they get punished. So yeah.
Well, and the other side of this is, there's attack vectors that can come if fishermen and service nodes, know who each other are. There could be, potential attacks that we're constantly trying to design for. The other side of an attack, which which has been one that's been kind of concerning to me, is when servicers know who they're serving. So, like, say, a big bank or we have Aave, right? We have Aave now using Pocket. If their application key gets known to the servicers or whoever, if at any point that application key gets known, people can know that they're serving Aave, which means they could intentionally target specific contracts. They could target specific wallets, and give bad information. And if you and especially if you know who that application is, you could have those kind of targeted attacks. That's something where I could see as being a real issue. Whereas if we have a gateway kind of solution already there, like a dedicated type of node, that would also protect the privacy of applications, where even if the application key is known, the service nodes won't actually know who they're serving. So I think there would be a real benefit to have a cloak layer on that level as well, and potentially both of those cloak layers, one's between servicers and validators and one's between servicers and applications, could be handled by a sort of like gateway node.
Couldn't Tor just be used for that, like with STEM, like through their API or something?
The issue with that would be, in my mind, would be the latency, because but the latency would be so insane, right? Like right now, we're able to offer inferior level latency, and that's because we have one hop, which is our which is our portal, right? And so we'd essentially be emulating what we currently have in terms of speed. We could is what I mean. So if we use something like Tor for every request and things of that nature, then that would add significant latency.
Well, even if you use a gateway, even if you use the gateway, the service node could still just look at the application. So that's like
correct.
So like you can go through all the IPs and Tors that you want, but as long as it can see the application key that it was sent with.
No, wait. No, in this case, remember there's a separation between app and client. Like you can have an application, and as long as you have enough clients, like how do you know which client is the actual app requesting for service and which one is the fisherman? Unless it's always coming from the same IP, and then all service nodes get together and they're like, oh, we don't have to serve apps. We know all the fisherman IPs, which is why I came up with that solution. But I also agree that adding that layer of VPN or whatever is gonna make the results be less accurate, because there you could be introducing networking conditions that don't play out. And again, by the problem with I even wrote a short spec about a gateway model. Where instead of having fishermen, we had gateways that get paired with the apps and the servicers, and they route every request. But then we saw many, like when we discussed it internally, there were several attacks and things like that wouldn't be as feasible as the fisherman model. But just a note on that. Shane, maybe we can workshop it around, but I at that point I was pretty convinced that a gateway model, a trustless gateway model, where you have these trustless gateways spin up and things like that, wouldn't be as viable.
Yeah, actually, now I understand what you're saying, Shane. I see. Yeah, the anonymity of that could work. I like that idea.
I'm not exactly following. It is so the fishermen, they sort of, as I understand it, they simulate what a user would look like. So kind of like a secret shopper. So how you would know that it's coming through a specific app, but how would you know that it's a fisherman and not just a regular user, like outside of the IP address? That's my first question. But then the second is, why does latency matter there? Because you might have users that have different latency scores. Like on the fisherman side, is it just because of the reporting back? Like, is that
if I have a sampling of latency that has a direct connection to the server that I'm sampling, I'm gonna get very consistent results. If I have something that goes through a routing, just like a VPN does, first you can't. We're going for geozoning on V1 to ensure fishermen apps and servicers are in the same at least geozone. So unless you can guarantee that the routing that you're gonna use goes through the same geozone, then you're gonna have disparate results, and that could affect your reputation and introduce burning, as Pierre was saying, and things like that.
Got it.
Yeah, and one other thought with the with kind of the gateway model. One thought is I really don't see gateways not being a part of Pocket in some form or fashion, where the majority of users are still going through gateways. One reason that I've been kind of proponent of this idea is because then we could actually bring gateways potentially on chain, where someone could choose, hey, I want to go through a particular gateway for my calls. And that could actually be an on-chain service. So instead of the Pocket Portal being a completely separate, entity that you have to, ideally, pay US dollars or something outside of Pocket completely, this would allow any infrastructure service, whether it be Infura, whether it be whatever, to still have all the added bonuses of what their, tech can bring while using Pocket as the infrastructure, right? And people could just designate with their app, hey, I want to use this gateway, and so we would have, there would be an element here where this would be a completely new type of node, but it would bring the gateway ecosystem on chain at least, so that things can still happen on chain, and we're not creating a fractured ecosystem where much of the network uses gateways, but they have to pay with that on some other currency or through some other mechanism that isn't on chain. So that's, at least, I know that's a big kind of concept, but that's at least where my mind went. Plus, it gives the privacy layers that we were talking about.
Yeah, Shane, I like that idea. But what I'm going to say is, in the context of like ADR 001, we kind of discussed how the fisherman sessions need to interplay with their anonymity. And Pierre, one of the things from before is, I think, having a sequence diagram where we kind of first submit a proof of what the test scores are and then reveal them later. I think that'll be a great addition to this. And Shane, regarding the addition of a different protocol level actor that kind of gives applications more optionality, definitely more work, might not be in the initial launch, but I think if we do decide to go down that approach, we should just submit a secondary proposal to it so we can start incorporating it. But I do think that the optionality to applications is going to be very important. And we might be able to leverage the fisherman, but I'm personally still thinking whether fishermen should also act as gateways, or if that should be a completely different protocol level actor.
Yeah, that's something I thought about, because Service Node has no incentive to dox like if applications have the option to send relays through Fisherman, just kind of as an extra precaution, and some fishermen can enable that. A service node has no incentive to dox, basically block requests from the fisherman and applications. And if applications are sending the request through a fisherman, then it's impossible for a service node to differentiate which ones are from the fisherman and which ones are from the application. So I think that maybe just having an option on fisherman where applications can send relays, and so for like big applications that need this data, they can just all send it through there.
Well, at that point, you don't need. At that point, you don't need to do sampling anymore. If fishermen are paired with apps for the same length of the session, and now all requests go through the fisherman, the sampling is the traffic that the application is sending. All the fisherman has to do is basically intercept that traffic, save it as evidence, and basically produce the same life cycle of submitting the test score based on the actual traffic that the application did. However, I believe that, I think what needs to be discussed there is what are the theoretical implications there, because now, first, we're dooming the architecture to always have that hub in between. And Shane, one research project that I'm undertaking is the evolution of AATs to see if we can create a developer experience very similar to using a gateway without having to use a gateway. But that is in very, very early stages. But I do see a future where we don't need gateways all the time. So a direct connection to the servicer will always be the most optimal. Now, in order to add this QoS feature, yes, monitoring the traffic that the apps do through the whatever gateway, fisherman gateway or whatever, will be the most accurate description of what the traffic is looking like from a QoS perspective. But we also have to think about the gamification aspects, where who could lie to who and all the game theory behind that and all of that.
Yeah, one of the with the gateways, the advantage would be you could have that you can't necessarily, or well, I guess it would depend on where your research goes, but the idea is gateways can provide QoS that are real time, right? Like our gateway right now, it's real time QoS, right? If there's an error, it resolves it for you, right? The application isn't having to resolve its own errors, unless we have a really robust kind of SDK, which is possible to some extent, from my understanding, but anyway, so and what if we were to, if fishermen were also to act as gateways, there still would need to be this way that fishermen can compare scores on to ensure that they're being trustworthy. And so I would almost see that the same kind of fisherman mechanism that we're talking about here would still happen, except basically the gateway fisherman. Well, maybe what could happen is the fisherman that's acting as the gateway doesn't do the report card, or maybe has some element in the report card, but it still takes the consensus of other fishermen to send their requests through that fisherman gateway to really come up with a report card for that servicer. So whether maybe fishermen don't judge who they're being a gateway for per se, but they do provide quality of service or something. But that way there wouldn't be targeted attacks where if they're acting as a gateway between servicers and an application, the scoring is still coming from outside fishermen.
So Shane, I think what I'll say is, it almost sounds like, as you're explaining that, I kind of feel like I don't want to couple with the fishermen, because there are a lot of ifs and else cases where in this case we do have a report or don't have a report, and we really kind of want to keep it as a simple secret shopper like actor. What you're describing sounds to me like a way for centralized service providers to essentially have an option to almost transfer to their business to a protocol actor where someone can choose to use them. But also because we're running out of time and on the hour, if if this is something you have more thoughts or ideas on, can you send an ADR, or maybe we'll think of a better acronym for it that's pocket specific for this type of actor that we can potentially incorporate into the spec in a separate proposal.
Yeah, sure. Happy to collaborate on this.
And I'll post some of these rough notes. I'll organize some of these rough notes and post them as a comment on the GitHub issue later.
Is there time for one more quick thought or question? Or are we wrapping up now?
I mean, if those who need to hop off, go ahead. But definitely, Steve, go for it.
On the Fisherman, if there's a penalty for reporting poorly, could there be a reward for like changing out your IP address? I don't know. Just thinking, how to attack that problem specifically of being anonymous. Like maybe the longer you have an IP address, the lower the rewards are. Incentivize the fishermen to figure out how to change up the IP address themselves.
Well, it's already kind of implemented because let's say all the other fishermen are constantly changing their IPs and one fisherman keeps the same IP. Inevitably, or maybe not enough, if depends how malicious the network is, but that fisherman has a higher probability of getting doxxed. And if one fisher, that's kind of, I guess, oh, never mind.
I mean, in the actual reward to the. Yeah.
I actually like that idea. In the current spec, since fishermen or people are appointed by the DAO, there's an expectation that they rotate out their IPs. But one thing that we can actually do very easily at the protocol level is have a TTL, maybe on the fisherman service domain or something. And then when that expires, they're essentially not functional anymore. Or maybe we can even, I don't know, I don't have a direct answer, but some sort of on-chain TTL for a fisherman's IP or service domain could incentivize them to do so, because maybe their test scores will turn into null samples if they don't. So I think there's definitely very easy on-chain ways to do this. Or not easy, but feasible.
Yeah, it's something exactly along those lines, kind of like how DHCP leases work. Where you have, a TTL, like this IP address can be a fisherman for this period of time, or there's some reward on the incentive side for, the less the IP address is used, the more your reward is, or something. I don't know.
Like that. And again, so we are brainstorming a lot of ideas here, but things like this, I think, should come in the form of other proposals that we can all collaborate on once we have it more well defined. But I will jot these down so they don't get the idea, so they don't get lost. Anything else regarding the ADR specifically? And I do know we're already past the hour, but I do want to take just 2 minutes to kind of share something if others want to contribute. So here in the Pocket repo, we have the high-level V1 roadmap, which are kind of like our big milestones, what our roadmap and what our timelines look like. So you can check that out. But if you want to actually jump in and contribute via code with, submitting PRs, submitting issues, we updated the contribution guide with some links and the fact that you can either get a grant or a scholarship once your open source contributions are kind of help the protocol move forward. But in the Pocket repo, one of the things that our team is doing right now is we're creating kind of mini milestones. So those high-level ones are just to guide the team and the community, but smaller milestones are actually much more actionable from what we're working on. So if we're looking at utility, it has lots of kind of goals where there's a few things we need to refactor. We need to build a small CLI. We need to define a few interfaces. And every single milestone is going to have like an integration issue, which covers the high level goals. But we're also in the process of kind of creating much more detailed issues within each one. So this might not be a great example, but actually with links to the code where you can jump in and how to contribute, there's a lot more that I'll personally be adding here in the coming days. So if you have time and interest, just kind of check these out or ping the chat and we can work that out. And there's going to be opportunities to contribute on any module, be it utility, persistence, consensus, P2P, and then we don't even maybe an RPC spec as an interest in working on that.
Oh, this is dope. This is actually really cool. I haven't seen any other. Well, you guys really know how to use GitHub well. This is, yeah, I think that this is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, this actually relates very well to the AMA that Thunderhead did this morning. There's a discussion of a job board. I think Pocket's GitHub repo can almost be seen as a job board of sorts.
What could be interesting is I know that there's one, like the one friction point with like at least that I can think of from an outsider perspective is that they have to do this and then afterwards they have to submit like a PEP or something. What could also be interesting is that P&I or one of us just submits a one PEP for like a couple 100,000 Pocket, and then we place basically bounties on each individual task. So like for example, like let's say you define one of those interfaces, boom, that's like 250 Pocket. And I think that if that's advertised, that a huge amount of devs will jump into that because it's like concrete exactly how much you're going to get for doing something and exactly what you have to do.
Yeah, we're getting it very much into the Gitcoin territory, and this is something that kind of the community has to decide. And I think there's some work being done there. At the moment, it's an open source project under the MIT license, and a good way to join in. But definitely opportunity to go down that path too. And that way, there's more incentive for the community to participate for bigger bounties and bigger projects.
Yeah, with the new GitHub projects, you could also like add metadata for like issues where you could say, you know, like we think this issue is worth this much in a reward. And maybe it's not like an on-chain like Gitcoin or something like that, but you could at least set some expectations around what it's worth to help, you know, developers get a better sense of what they're getting into in terms of potential rewards as a result of their work.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Well, I personally don't know if this is a DAO decision or a P&I decision or both, but I'll definitely bring you back to the team, and we can even talk about it in the next community call. All right. So we're already over time. I'll post some of the notes for today's meeting. We can all keep posting updates in the V1 Dev and V1 Research channel. But otherwise, if you have any other topics you want to cover in the community call, submit it in the Google Forms for 2 weeks from now.
Sweet. This was fun. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Sure. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.